We'll move. Fire and EMS budget.
Must see TV. Oh.
Okay. Well, while we're talking slowly, waiting for Deb, there's two boards that have quorums. So I will call to order the special meeting of the Village of Trumansburg Board of Trustees.
And I will call to order the special meeting of the town of Ulysses.
We have a number of new faces or some new faces in the room, so I thought we would just quickly go around the room while we're speaking slowly, waiting for Deb, and introduce ourselves. I'm Gordon Hart, the mayor in the Village of Trumansburg.
Marcia Horn, trustee, also fire commissioner for the Trumansburg Board.
Keith Hannon, trustee, police commissioner, not relevant.
Caitlin Olson, town supervisor for Ulysses.
Rich Goldman, deputy supervisor.
Carissa Parlato, town clerk. Mary Bouchard, town board member. Liz Weatherby, town of Ulysses, town board member.
That mean?
We'll get there.
Joel Fay, EMS administrator.
Matt, did you want to sit at the table?
No, sorry.
All right, Matt, you might as well introduce yourself. So Joel, introduce himself.
Matt Taylor, I'm the Trumansburg Fire Department Fire Chief.
Are you here officially?
Yeah.
Why aren't you sitting at the table?
She doesn't like me very much. Enough of that.
Okay, fine, Michelle, go ahead.
I'm Michelle Wright, I'm the budget officer and second deputy supervisor for the town of Ulysses.
Ben Dickens, town of Hector. Mike Reynolds, town of Covert supervisor.
Ben Carver, deputy mayor, Village of Trumansburg, and EMS commissioner.
I'm Jen Schlossberg, I'm deputy clerk, deputy treasurer for the village of Trumansburg.
I'm Jessica Giles. I'm the village clerk treasurer for Trumansburg.
Trustee Ben Darfler can't make it this evening.
Justin Boyez coming for Hector as well. He'll be about 15 minutes late.
Okay. You want us to talk extra slow and wait for him, or do you want us to get started when Deb gets here?
Sounds quick.
You want us to wait on him, or should we? Yeah. All right, Deb's got 30 seconds. So first of all, I appreciate everyone being flexible on the start time. My intention is that we can move through the budget relatively quickly, but at the same time, I don't want to give short shrift to anything if anyone does have questions or wants to talk about anything in particular. So I think what we can do, if there's no objection to it, is we can start with the fire budget. I won't discuss each line, but I'll certainly highlight any lines that have significant spending changes, if any. But if there's any line that anyone does want to ask a question about, or has a question, or wants to know, why do we have this line in the budget, then certainly just stop me and we can discuss that. And Chief Taylor is here for kind of the whys and the what is this for, and the why do we have this, if those come up. So slightly different format. It's more or less the same format, but maybe a little different than previous years for those of you that have seen a lot of these. The highlighted in, what is that, beige?
It's a nice feeling.
Taupe. They say taupe is very soothing. That kind of beige-ish column is what we're proposing for the village's 2024-25 budget, which takes effect next June. But of course, the towns will be billed for the calendar year, for your budget year. 23-24 budget column immediately to its left is the year we are in, which began June 1 for the village. We don't have a year to date because we're only a couple of months in to our budget cycle. The next two columns to the left are last year's budget, which for the village ended May 31st. And you can see budget versus actual on those two columns. So just starting at the top, I'm just looking at, you can look at the percentage columns to see easy changes. There's effectively no changes to the first few lines. We have an increase in the turnout gear maintenance line from 15,000 to 18,000. The next line that sees any change is $700 increase for physicals and immunizations. $1,000 increase on the vehicle repair line. Seen a slight reduction on the insurance line. Phones, we still have landlines in the building. Hose, ladder, pump, and SCBA is seeing a slight increase. And then there's a slight decrease in the fire medical hospital. So we break out into the fire and EMS budget, even though in the village budget cycle, it all comes from our general fund. We break out a small portion of the cost of the two ladies to my right, the front office, health insurance, and so on, for the time that they spend on these specific budgets. So even though it's an all volunteer department, when you see the first line, which is personnel, and then when you see medical hospital, that's a tiny piece of the health insurance costs for our front office staff who develop budgets for fire. And then the last two lines are worth mentioning or worth spending a moment on. We had a one, is it the pumper? The mini pumper was a lease to own. And the lease, the last payment for the lease has been made. So now we own the vehicle, there's no more payments. So those lines are zeroed out. And that accounts for the large reduction from 239 to 211. The reason why the overall budget has not dropped commensurately is we're increasing, now going down to the reserve lines, we're increasing that first line, the fire apparatus line. We're increasing that line by, it's actually a little bit less than the amount of the lease payment that we no longer have. For a couple of reasons. We have and I can share it with you if you're really interested. We have a capital replacement cycle spreadsheet that goes out to 2035 or 2036, and it shows when we're going to be getting new vehicles. We've just ordered a new vehicle, which won't be delivered for 30 months. So it's a 2.5 year build cycle because of production costs and materials and so forth. And it's coming in about $125,000 to $150,000 more than we had projected it to cost. So the next vehicle to be replaced, when's the Quint being replaced?
Quinn's after 04, so 04 goes in, that's a 2010, so it should be around
27 or 28, we planned on.
29, stretched them back and forth a little bit.
So we're anticipating what used to cost $700,000 now costs $9. The ladder truck, which
That's an 11, so that'd be like 31, 32.
yeah, it was around 800,000 right now. Currently, if we were to go out and buy a new ladder truck, they're over $1 million. So we're planning on about $1.2 million for that in 7 or 8 years, I think optimistically. So we just need to, but the intention is to, and you can see along the last few years on the reserve lines, we went from 125 to 150 to 175. We're bumping it to 200. I'd like to get that to 250 within the next couple of years and then hold it there. And maintain the same replacement cycle we have. We actually stretched our replacement cycle. You may recall a couple of years ago, we were pretty religious about replacing the trucks every 20 years. And now we're kind of in the 20 to 25, depending on how much wear and tear they've had on them and depending on what our reserve budget line looks like. So we took the lease payment that we no longer have, moved 25,000 of it into the fire apparatus reserve. The next two reserve lines remain the same. And then fire equipment, and Matt can speak to this. We had it at 60,000 2 years ago. It had always been 15. This is non-vehicle equipment. We bumped it to 60 for 1 year, and then last year we dropped it back down to 15 to try to massage the budget a little bit. And now we're going back to the 60 that we had a couple of years ago. And Matt, do you have specific pieces of equipment?
So this
Lined up.
line, the reason why I took it to 60 from 15 was for the upfit of the new truck. So, you know, we're doing the 24-25 budget amendment at this point here. The truck should land somewhere in July of 25. So by the time this cycles all the way through and we get to 25, 24, 25, that truck will be hitting like on the backside of the budget cycle in May-ish part of May of 25, when the truck shows up, the money's there to outfit the truck. So we purchased a fire truck. We didn't purchase anything that goes into a fire truck or any of the shelving or all of the stuff that makes a fire truck. We bought a box, a cab, an engine, some tires, all that there. So that's what this is carrying along, is that type of replacement. To push into that as well, some stuff is starting to life cycle out. And I don't want to just put it into operations. It's better to kind of build up a reserve and then buy things in quantity like hose. You go out and buy $10,000 or $20,000 worth of hose, you get a much better deal than if I buy a roll today and a roll next month and a roll a month after. Because they go out and farm out the pricing a little bit, and get you a more competitive price if you go out and buy a large quantity at a crack. So that was the kind of the point of this equipment reserve line, is to boost it up. The reason why it was 60,000 2 years ago, we put in for a regular grant that we've been unsuccessful for probably 5 years now. And that $60,000 buys the replacement radios for the officers. Because the grant cycle, while the government is generous, they're not generous enough. They will buy a radio per seat on a fire truck. And that is it. So I don't have a seat on the fire truck. All the other officers don't. Spare radios, things like that will have to be bought out of the budget somewhere. So that's why those dollars were in there a couple years ago. Go down to $60,000.
Warren, could we, these are the reserves that go into the budget, but can we see what the actual reserve, total reserve is?
I have it. Good question. Give me 45 seconds. Okay, so unfortunately, I only have the apparatus reserve.
I have them all if you need a burden.
Matt, yes, okay.
Okay. Go ahead.
So fire apparatus, 859, 453 currently. This does not include anything that is in a proposed budget. Firehouse building, 232, 687, fire radios, 69, 359, and fire equipment, 142, 447.
And this would be as of 5/31,
That's
yes.
correct, yeah.
And I'm happy to share I don't have a way to project it, unfortunately. If anyone's interested, I can share the capital replacement cycle sheet. Right now, we are looking at spending this fire truck that's been ordered and will be delivered first half of 2025. Has not been paid for, it's been ordered. And the price tag is $879,000 for that truck. When we first put together this capital replacement cycle sheet back in 2019, that was projected to cost $750, so we're about 130 more.
Could you just delineate the apparatus versus the equipment?
The apparatus is vehicles,
Right.
only vehicles. Could be any of the fire trucks, could be the chief's vehicle, could be theoretically, it could be a boat. It's equipped, it's vehicles of one type or another. Equipment is anything that isn't a vehicle,
Hoses and.
or anything that goes on a vehicle, in a vehicle, on a person. And whatnot. So that would be first half of 25, we're gonna spend, currently slated to spend 879,000. And then we're actually looking at first half of 2028, 3 years later. That's 04. Right now, we're guessing it's gonna be around 900,000. That will adjust that year to year as we see what prices actually are. And I have the ladder truck pushed out to the first half of 2032. Try to buy us some wiggle room. And I have that right now projected at 1.1 million. And then we won't need to buy another truck, we hope, until about the first half of 2038. So just when we look back in time, the way these vehicles were purchased, they kind of clustered in like a 7-year cycle, and then there was a break for 4 or 5 years. So we're still working, more or less working with those replacement guidelines, but they're not exactly every 20 years. Sometimes they're 22 or 23.
So are you anticipating that this $200,000 approximately is what we could anticipate? Are the reserves that you're proposing in this budget? Are we anticipating that that's gonna be what the reserve breakdown might look like moving forward, maybe readjusted for
I have
a small
next,
percentage?
I have next year going to 225. The following year going to 250. The following year going to 275. And I have it staying at 275 out into 2040.
And what about the other lines?
I don't anticipate any change to firehouse building or fire radio. Fire equipment will be kind of a year to year. This year, we're anticipating the outfitting needs for the new truck. It'll be a year to year question of whether that stays at 60 or we can reel it in. What's in, what did you say was in that fire equipment reserve line, the bank balance?
142,447.
And what are you expecting all of the outfitting for the new truck to run?
Around close to 60.
Anything else coming out of the fire equipment reserve at the moment?
So, well, we got radio replacements out of that, as well as the radio line, so there's 69,000 in radio line. And then you got some rope stuff that we gotta replace, like some bigger items. Trying to remember when Jason bought STBA last, but those cycle out in 15 years. I think we're probably close to 7 or 8. So you're talking about, we have 34 air packs at 8,000 a piece. So like we got a grant through working with COVID and I believe Air Lincoln or Lodi, a bunch of years back, Jason did, and that covered all, but I believe 20% of the cost. But I'm learning pretty quick that government is listening to far and few between anymore. So trying to ensure that because they all bought at the same exact time, they're all in the life cycle at exactly the same time. So in 15 years, all 34 bottles and packs obsolete. So it's, I think probably over the next 5 to 10 years, we start replacing 2 or 3 and get into a cycle where you're not having to dump $500,000 on air packs in a shot and hope that you're gonna hit a mark 10 years down or 15 years down the road. As far as reserving enough money, that's what we're stumbling on with fire trucks. The cost of fire trucks is going up way faster than we want to move our budgets, obviously, because it just isn't possible all the time to take it up 25 or 30%. The manufacturers don't care. They need the product, they need the manpower. They're gonna pay for whatever they have to push that cost out to the municipalities and departments. So, I mean, during COVID and the end of COVID, manufacturers are getting double-digit increases quarterly on their trucks. So 8%, 10%, 11%, 10%, 9%, 12%. And that compounds fast at $700,000. And so that's why we're now at 900, 950, 925, $1.2 million, $1.3 million. You know, going down the road, and, you know, I'm not worried about 2038, obviously, I won't be sitting here then. But somebody's gonna, somebody here will be.
Gordon will be.
So I'm trying to set somebody else up for success.
What's the useful life of the fire truck?
NFPA says 20 years. You can run them longer. In Florida, you probably can run them way longer than they do here. They just rot out faster in the northern states than they do in other areas. 20 years is about what we have. The truck that's being replaced is 2001, so it's 22 years old, and it's limping. So, you know, 22, 23, 4 is probably about the max.
What do you do with the truck?
So we'll sell it.
For some,
Yeah,
We sell it to other fire
Or
companies.
municipality.
Yeah.
some other fire company can buy it.
That is what I want.
Any other line item questions?
I probably asked this last and I don't remember if I did or if I, the answer. So between what's adopted and what's expended, I mean, I think you guys seem to be doing a good job keeping your expenditures under what is the budget's adopted. What happens to that extra money?
Sits in the village general fund.
I like asking it every time.
so that, I mean, we've gone around on that issue before.
Yeah.
But consistently, you're coming in under budget. For the last 4 or 5 years anyway.
Thank the fire chief for
Thank you, Jason.
Your money's my money.
Matt.
No,
Man,
Yes, I know, Matt. Wasn't Jason the fire chief? So I'm thanking both. But it seems a little unfair that the budget seems to be over what we spend over time and the money just goes back in the village general fund.
Yeah, I know it's the never ending conversation, right? So from the village's perspective, when we were over, so these are all village departments. It's not like water or sewer that are in any way statutorily stated. It's all part of our general fund budget. When we were over on EMS by $100,000 that one year, we had to make it up somewhere. And so from our perspective, I get it that the fire and EMS budget to the towns is split out differently, but from the village's perspective, there's enough volatility between these two departments that we try to play it as close as we can. But we know that we're going to have overages that we can't charge back for. And so when we have underages, when we're under budget, whether it's fire or EMS, not that EMS has been under budget in a long time, the differential has to come from something.
and you couldn't do, I mean, I get it. I get needing to smooth the budget. I get that. Why not put it into reserve? So if you have a year where you need the extra, that's where it can come from, as opposed to just in the general fund.
Because we would have to put it into an equipment reserve, which can only be spent on that.
vehicles.
We can't use it. There's no such thing as a fire budget. projection reserve or something. We would either end up putting it into an equipment line, or we can have a tax rate stabilization reserve, but that's village tax rate. So there isn't a way to reserve the money for this process between the towns, because in the eyes of the comptroller, the towns are customers buying a service, and we charge what we charge, and if we turn a profit that's good on the village, there isn't a way for us to reserve that specifically for fire contracts.
So you can't have an unassigned fund balance,
But we have unassigned fund balance.
but you can't have it that.
We can't have it tagged to fire or EMS or any department. Water and sewer obviously being separate, but unassigned fund balance in the general fund sits as unassigned fund balance and can be used for whatever we want. But it can't be earmarked for any of the general fund budgets.
What about the idea of, I mean, cutting the budget by 10% or some number, and if we go over, we agree to get billed for the overage.
You can't agree to be billed because you can't bind, theoretically, you're binding a future board to a payment. You can't bind a future board to an action.
Well, you can't after a certain period of time, it's there, I mean, you can do bindings, like you can do 3-year MOUs, 5-year MOUs, but you can't go past the 5-year. Cause that's
We
considered,
could do a multi-year contract. You do a multi-year contract, but then you're agreeing to pay for multiple years at once. But you can't pass legislation that says, we agree today that a future board will pay you if X happens. That's a constitutional provision. Just like Congress can't bind a future Congress. Congress can agree what to spend today, and they can spend $1 million today. They can buys them 3 years worth of service. But they can't pass legislation that says in 2030 that Congress will buy something. That's essentially what you would be doing if you agreed in principle to pay if we were over budget.
Could it be looked at as just a bill for services?
Not in the fire world, not in the fire budget world.
What happens to all the donations that the fire has?
So the separation is the fire company and the fire department. Any check that comes to the village under fire department, I think there's a line you guys carry in the general fund, maybe.
We officially, the policy is we send those checks back. Because the village cannot accept donations.
If it's sent to the fire company. then
The company.
is the one for company.
The fire company's a 501c, not for
Right, I
profit.
know that,
So
but I don't see any line or anything there. We don't have a separate,
Well, we can't spend their money.
they can.
They do.
Spend money on
They
their
do spend
behalf
their money.
as the department.
They pay for all their training and,
Well, that's what I was asking.
Yeah, we don't
You know,
pay for
what
that.
happens to that money.
Yeah.
that
They
is
are-
donated to
spend
the
it.
company?
they are an independent entity.
So I'll throw this in, I'm not sure if everybody's aware, so the fire company last year put a campaign together to buy new rescue tools. The company raised somewhere around $123,000, which went back to, we bought Hearst tools, it was about 80,000, we bought new struts, some other stuff, we've probably got, I don't know, $8,000 or $10,000 of those funds left at this point. But all of those tools sit out there in a truck, ready to go to action out here. That wasn't paid for by a single taxpayer outside of us reaching our pocket, throwing $10 in a hat somewhere that we were looking for some money. So the company has done quite a bit to try to offset some of these numbers here that you have to go to explain to your constituents. And take that information when they're asking those, like, hey, why did this go up $20,000? What's going on? Say, hey, by the way, the the Trumansburg Fire Company went to work, bought $125,000 worth of equipment that we're all gonna use. The village owns it at this point. We don't own it. We buy it. We turn it over on a handshake. That way the village maintains the equipment. The company doesn't maintain it. It helps keep everything black and white as far as company and village owned equipment. Like the tables and chairs you're sitting at, the fire company owns those. The coffee pot, fire company owns. The fire truck and everything inside that apparatus bay, the fire department owns, which is the village entity. And so anything that's gathered, if we buy it from the fire company, whatever it is, Hearst tools, could be, new air packs, whatever. The fire company basically donates that to the village with $1, sells it to the village. And then that becomes a village asset on the village's side of things, and I maintain it through the budget. So.
I actually think I'll take a half a step sideways. I think maybe some of you will know this, maybe most of you will know this. But just as a refresher, if you do know it, and if you don't know it, New York State being New York State, there's a lot of little different intricacies in how fire departments can be structured. So in a town fire company needs to be an independent entity that owns all the equipment and owns all the things, and they have volunteers and they contract with the town that they exist in. Obviously, paid municipal fire is just a paid department. A fire district is a taxing authority that encompasses multiple jurisdictions and usually has a contract with a town fire company. Although theoretically, they could also have a contract with a village fire department. In a village, you cannot have a fire company without the approval of the village. And that happened in 1950, whatever. In a village, the village fire company then becomes an independent not-for-profit, and all they have are the manpower. They're the volunteers. And the department is a wholly owned department of the village in which that fire company resides. And so the relationship is different. There's no contract between the village of Trumansburg and the Trumansburg Fire Company, because they only exist because the village allowed it in the first place. A town fire company anybody can form a town fire company, and they can exist on their own with or without contracts if they can find the money to have the equipment. So the relationship is slightly different. So to Deb's question, the fire company is its own person, and the village owns the department and all the equipment. And the fire company essentially loans its volunteers to the village to use the village's equipment. And so the fire company can do fundraising, which is nice because the village can't. And as Matt said, $100,000 raised for equipment. We every once in a while we throw out the word boat. A boat would be something that the fire company could fundraise for. It's something the village could go to a legislator for. So we can try to do both, fundraise and get governmental money. I don't know that answered your question at all, Deb, but that's.
It's
Yeah, I
complicated.
just wanted to throw that out there so everybody else.
So they have their own treasurer and their own bank accounts, and they get their donations mailed to them, and they open it up, they announce them at every meeting. It's very sweet. And so they manage it that way.
And so to Matt's point, if their fundraiser last year had fallen flat, you would see about $87,000 in this budget for that equipment that they needed.
So is there one in the works, Matt? Fundraiser?
There is, I don't know who's golfing Saturday, but that's the next fundraiser, trying to buy an electronic sign for the front of the building. Comes cheaply at 30 grand. So the company is very active in trying to persuade people to give us money. And you know, with the rescue tools, we had a couple of very gracious donations, one from Gary Sinise Foundation, who donated 23,000 and change somewhere in there. Everything else came from business and or personal donation from people in the district. So, you know, very successful campaign. We had a lot of help from a lot of outside people, mailings and radio ads. I know Keith, significant other helped us on a couple of fundraising pieces and getting our name out, and it was successful. Now, doesn't mean the next one's gonna be, you know, past performance is not indicative of future results, as Gordon will tell you. So, you know, hopefully with the golf tournament, get some cash out of that, we start to build that fund to buy the sign, and then the whole conversation ever comes around, that's where the next thing. So we're out there working at it, but it's tough work. Chicken barbecues don't sell, you know, you gotta find something that really helps. And honestly, what we found is just asking for the money sometimes is the best way. And just, hey, can you give us $10, $20? People
Right.
like their shits.
Well, don't forget, Matt, we're all in this together.
I agree 100%.
So, yeah, let us know.
Any other questions on the line items?
Well, the jump from 15 to 60,000 again for the fire equipment is pretty substantial. I know you had 60, 60 and 15. How do it goes?
We had 60 built in last year. And in this meeting last year, we lowered it to 15 after some conversation. The plan had been to leave that at 60. So the 15 was a concession to try to help the towns. And now we're back to 60 because of the need to outfit the new truck when it gets here in 20 months, 22 months.
And the 142,000 in reserves doesn't cover that.
Well, it won't cover that plus the other pieces of equipment. And, you know, Matt is also thinking in terms of reserving for the SCBA gear when it needs to be replaced in another 7 or 8 years. That'll be, 200 and probably 250,000 ish, you know, unless we get a grant for that. You know, we always look for the grant, but we have to reserve as if we're never going to get the money in order to replace that equipment. So the 60 going in today is spent, and then there's random other equipment. Let's just, for Thursday evening, let's just make up some numbers. If there's 142 now, the 60 is an in and out to outfit the new truck. And then some random equipment gets bought in the next year. Let's say we're at 130. And if we maintain that cycle, including outfitting the next truck in 2028, you know, we're going to be back and forth. We're hopefully going to be around 250, 300 by the time the SCBA needs to be replaced. Then we drop to 250, and then now we're down to 50 again. So it's
So if you did get a grant, what happens to this? And you don't have to spend the 60.
then it would sit in the reserve account. Well, this 60, we're not going to get a grant for this 60. I'm thinking about the SCBA in a few years. You know, if we build up to, if we had 200, if we had 300,000 in that reserve in 7 years, and we got a grant for the SCBA, so we didn't need to spend it, then we could theoretically, we could zero out that reserve line for a few years in the budget.
So I will warn you though, we have a radio grant out now with the city of Ithaca and the Enfield Fire Department, which is that Enfield Fire Department, I believe. And I think we wrote that grant for us. We have about, I want to say 40-ish portables and mobiles. A mobile's about $8,000, there's 7 of them. And then 44, we'll call it. It's another 160. So we're at about $200,000 worth of radios that have been obsolete and non-repairable for probably 8 or 10 years now. They're hanging hanging by a thread. So to kind of answer your question, Richard, there's never enough money at the end of the day. Like, if it's not air, if we get a grant for air packs, and we don't get a grant for radios, we're buying radios. If we get radios and not air packs, we're buying air packs. It's just where the money is gonna be used is really the question. There's more need than there is money, unfortunately. You know, if we get a radio grant and an air pack grant, we'll all sit here and give high fives and say nice job, and I'll run the budget at zero for a couple of years to run things out. I'm not trying to build it up just to have it there, for no need. I just we don't want to get caught in a situation where we can't provide services because we don't have the money. Which is, you know, always a problem. And everything takes so long to do. Trucks are 30 months, 32 months, 28 months, radios are 6 months. Air packs are probably 12, 15 weeks, like, no, I don't go buy 30 or 40 radios off the shelf at the moment, just, you know, come back to the firehouse. It takes 2 or 3 or 4 months to get processed through, get all the bidding done, get them purchased, get them ordered, get them received, get them programmed, get them in use, get everybody trained on them, the whole 9 yards. So everything takes exponentially longer now post-COVID than it used to. Companies just don't keep stuff on the shelf anymore. And probably for good reason, they don't want to afford to do this. So, does that help, Rich?
Sure. How come the hose ladder pumps SDBA only said 2504 in 2022 when it was budgeted to be 15K?
I guess you want to play more.
Which line?
83410.47.
Maybe that counts got 81.
You budgeted 15, but it looks like you only spent 2,000.
So I will point out that the 2022-23 is an unaudited position. So there very well could be, permission.
Oh.
It looked like those numbers might be swapped, where radios was probably the 2,500.
Oh, I see.
The radios, I probably just- I guess.
Good call. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, that's all of our, so hose ladder pump SCB, that's all of the required testing and maintenance for those entities. So every year we have all of our hose tested. It got done last month.
Yeah.
Ladders are tested, pumps are all tested on the trucks, SCBA's get serviced twice a
So
year.
that's fine, yeah.
Yeah, it's all.
He answered it, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions on any of those lines? Before we move on to the next sheet. There really isn't much of an update on the new fire hall, except to say that we did get included as a line item in this year's federal budget on the House side for $3.5 million. We did not get included in the Senate version, so we are all waiting to find out how things come out in reconciliation. If we do get the $3.5 million, it's an I forget the term. It's not unencumbered. It's not unattached. There's a word for it. There's no cost share. It's open-ended federal money for the construction of the new fire hall. That's the good news. The bad news is that's less than half of what we need. We need about 8.7. So going back to the good news, if we do get, and I don't have a way to handicap the odds on this, but if we were to get the 3.5 from the federal government with that money in hand, it would probably be easier to go to the state and go through a couple of other federal grants to try to piecemeal a little bit. So I don't know how many of you follow the federal budget process, but if you are ever bored enough to be watching it, we're hoping that piece comes through. We really don't have a backup plan in terms of funding. I have had some village residents and fire company life members who have some interesting ideas about fundraising from very wealthy folks who live on Cuba Lake. That's not impossible. The gentleman who wrote a check to Cornell for 52 million does live on Cuba Lake in the summer. 8 million is a drop in the bucket when you're writing checks to Cornell for 52. But is that something we can plan on? Obviously not. So if it doesn't work out in this federal budget cycle, we'll keep going back. Because both departments, the fire and the EMS department, deserve a new facility with adequate space and resources for them to continue their operations. Which leads me to the next sheet. I'm actually going to start on the right-hand upper current assessment graph. For the first time ever, the property value protected in the Trumansburg Fire Protection District crossed $1 billion. I am not aware of another fire company in upstate New York that protects that much asset value. I haven't done a lot of research on it, but I think outside of metro areas, I don't know that there would be one. And that just speaks to, we all got our school tax bill. That just speaks to property values in the Finger Lakes. So part of my pitch when I talk to the folks in DC is that there is, in my opinion, and I'm obviously biased, but there is no single more crucial fire department in the entire Finger Lakes than this one. Because there's nothing else in between here and the north of us that has the capacity that we do. So that's a testament to the fire company, the fire chief and the volunteers. They have a good bench. They have a good list of their officers right now are Chief retired,
Yeah, I'm the oldest.
which makes you the oldest.
Yeah.
Everyone else is in their mid-40s or younger. Which is great. Most fire companies, if you drive through rural upstate New York, you know, and this is not to be ageist, but when your line officers in a fire department are in their 70s, that makes you a little nervous if you need people to be able to run into a burning building and drag someone out. So last year, you'll recall, after a couple of years of conversation, we implemented a different way, a slightly different way of breaking out the budget. We used to forever use a 3-year average of call volume. And that has some volatility built into it because calls can shift dramatically from one year to the next. And former fire commissioner, Ben Darfler, actually I guess 2 fire commissioners ago, began to look at what some other fire departments do, which is to use assessment value to split budgets or to develop a cost structure under the premise that fire departments exist to protect primarily, unless they're also running an ambulance department, primarily to protect property value. So after, as I said, some significant back and forth, we settled on a 75-25 split between what we're calling the variable side, how much fuel is used, how often do trucks actually get out on calls, versus the fixed costs, which is how much does it cost just to have a department available, and what would those costs look like if we had some theoretical year where we had 0 calls. And so the breakdown that we settled on was 75% to fixed, 25% to variable. And because the differential between that and a call volume based budget split was significant enough, we then further said, well, let's phase in over 5 years this move towards this hybrid method of splitting the budget. So you'll see different spreadsheet cutouts here, what the 3-year call volume number would be. We'll pick on Ulysses. You know, if it was purely call volume based, your split of the proposed budget would be 240, call it 244,000. If it was entirely the new way of doing it, it would be 282,000. So how do we soften that and phase our way into it? And that's the bottom graph. So last year was the first year of phasing into the new approach. This is year 2. And you see the budget breakdown. Slight increases for Covert in the village, larger increases for Ulysses, and Hector gets the only slight reduction. And so that is what's proposed as the contract dollar amount that would be sent to the towns. Assuming or trusting that you pass your fire budget this fall. There was a lot of word salad. Any questions on kind of the new approach, the breakdown, how it was figured, what the rationale is, or any of the numbers specifically?
So it's the blue box, we gotta pay.
Yep.
The bottom, that's what I put in. That'll work.
Comments, questions before we move on to the big budget?
So the annual change number, 15,000, about 75, where does that come from? And Ulysses, because it goes, going 226 to 259, which is 33,000.
Yeah, and our annual thing looks like it's going down. I don't think those. Those must be old.
That is the differential between this year's blue box and what you would be paying if we only use the 3-year call volume method at the time, the old way. So under the old way, Ulysses would be 244, now it's 259. Under the old way, the village would have been 180, and now we're 156. Any other questions? And I want to be efficient with time, but I don't want to cut anyone off if anyone does have comments or questions. Okay. EMS budget.
So I'll jump in here.
Yeah, I'll just, before Ben jumps in with it, with the line item walkthrough, I will just say that this is the first time in my memory, it's not as good as it used to be, that we have an almost flat EMS budget.
What is it?
That's what we're gonna get into. So thank you, Joel, for your continued stewardship over the department and the budget. And I will.
Yeah, not you. So before I answer that question, I wanted to start out by saying that one little piece of good news I have is that Joel has been investigating alternative billing companies. And one of the real upsides in doing that looks like we will be able to, almost no matter where we move from this point, we'll have much greater visibility into the billing process. Which it's probably not concrete enough to include in your budget this year, but it should mean that we'll return a greater percentage of what we've really earned. So upon, I don't want to call it an audit, because I don't know that it was that thorough, but sort of Joel has been looking into closely why so many of our calls, we're just not getting any return on them, even though they were billed or they should have been billed, but it looks like they just weren't getting billed. So it's something to hopefully next year, it will still be flat, or at least this budget won't necessarily change, but it'll be, when you go home to do your budgets, that'll be reflected there. So more update on that, but I wanted to start with good news, because good news is few and far between when you talk budget. The other piece, to answer Rich's question, the reason that this budget is largely flat, the big reason is that you may recall that last year we had budgeted for a clerk.
For what?
For a clerk. And our hope was that we could take, or I don't know, hope, our planning at the time was to take billing internal because we knew that there were problems and that was the only way that we could think to figure it out. We didn't end up doing that. It looks like the billing companies that we're leaning towards at this point would still be third-party contractors. So that has been cut out of the budget this year. So that's really the big gap. So, I think Roden and I have hammered this home every year, probably for a long, long time, that this is healthcare. We are trending still very much with healthcare expenses. So even though this budget appears to be flat, if you were to keep that clerk piece out, we are still moving up. So, I guess what I'm saying is don't get your hopes up for next year. We're trying to keep it down, obviously, but that really is the big change. But anyway, so moving from that to,
Yeah, so one other thing, just to learn about me, one of my biggest projects that I've taken on, but it's massive, is researching, one, why we're not getting the revenue back in like I've had at other agencies, as you mentioned. So I'm really expecting that to significantly increase over the years for each municipality as they bring money in to offset that. Healthcare is a problem, as we all know. What that is, I don't know, but the other part, I would love to hear, in the future from you guys, because I know recently, I think Ulysses is the only one with a pending change. Everyone else has kind of increased their rates, or changed their rates, I should say, based off of a lot of research that I had done from what insurance companies pay out. So that should be carried over to your taxpayers. It's going to be carried over to the big insurance company. And so hopefully that helps with it all.
and hopefully it goes without saying, but Joel will very much keep you all in the loop. So you'll know as that goes.
And I'll just add, since Ben started on a happy note, I'll be the wet blanket. The wild card is always going to be the staffing required to cover the calls we take. We continue to cover a very large area outside of district. We're about 400 square miles in total. The contracted district is just 112 or 115. So, call up in Romulus last week or 2 weeks ago, multiple calls a week. I think the other day was 3 or 4 in one day in the city of Ithaca. So we continue to see that strain on the network. As you're probably aware, Tompkins County is looking at stepping into the gap a little bit with their own EMT-based rapid response model to kind of fill in where to our south, particularly the south part of the county, where the fire companies have EMT response but can't always take the calls. Currently, when a fire company can't take a call, Bangs will respond in most of those areas, which means Bangs doesn't have the coverage for the next call that comes in the northern part of the town of Ithaca, or I don't know if you guys took the call at Wegmans yesterday or did standby, random stuff comes up in the city that we then become the next closest agency. So that strain on the system, if it's not addressed, if it's not fixed somehow, will eventually lead to us having to staff a second ambulance for at least part of the day. So when you look at a $734,000 payroll cost, that's one ambulance, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If we had a second ambulance routinely 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, we're adding, $370,000 to the payroll line overnight. So we're trying to avoid that scenario, and Joel can talk about some of the things he's done to massage that transition, but that's the direction we're headed. If other ambulance agencies in our region continue to feel tremendous strain on their ability to respond to calls. What CMC has done in Schuyler County has helped somewhat in that direction, but there's no one to do something similar to our north. And there isn't an effort to do anything similar in the city of Ithaca proper. Hopefully what the county is doing can alleviate some of that strain to our south.
Is the task force still alive?
Which task force?
EMS, Remember, we had that
State
big
county.
meeting with, Senator,
The state EMS task force?
yeah, that we had that big
The
meeting on
state
it.
EMS task force has been staffed, as all of the people have been picked for it. And to my knowledge, they've met 3 or 4 times. And they are doing exactly what we would have expected them to do, which is study the problem.
All righty then, but they keep you up to date, I suppose.
There's not really a
No
lot.
progress?
Not really a lot.
So the town EMS hospital medical 9060.81.
So why don't I scroll through quick and then we can get to any specific questions. So I won't probably talk about nearly as much even as Jordan did. There's just a couple that I want to point out. The first was that personal services line, which we talked about earlier. The next that I want to draw your attention to is the scuba equipment line. It's a fairly small line item, and the reason that it's a small line item is that most of the equipment is being donated. We have it there, and then we have a reserve also. But we have primarily staff, both in the EMS department and the fire company, who are trained or interested in scuba and being rescue divers, have donated lots of equipment, so that this will be a fairly small cost to maybe start up a fairly large program, but it will always be sort of a secondary thing. There are some concerns about how we'll operationalize that, but it is in the process and it is largely relying on donations. So I just wanted to highlight that. The vehicle maintenance line is 3 lines down from that. That one has gone up a fairly large amount, relatively speaking. And I just wanted to highlight it because it's part of the replacement cycle. That line increases as our ambulances are getting older. We've had some fairly large repairs, so just to keep you aware of that. The next big piece is fairly far down. How many lines was that? 8 or 9 lines down. It's the 100% increase, 37,800, that line. For those of you who were here last year, you may remember that we increased the equipment reserve contribution. Joel had just started at that point, and him and I were looking through equipment replacement cycles and realized that we didn't have equipment replacement cycles. And some substantial pieces of equipment were very, very old. So the idea last year was to start increasing that line gradually. Unfortunately, Joel realized recently, just a couple weeks ago, that some of that equipment we can't even insure or have maintenance plans on at this point. So we're sort of, the village has already made the decision to buy these. We are already paying for the lease. And this is unfortunately just one of those things that has to be what it is. So this includes auto call, stretchers. What else is there?
The stretchers, the load system for the stretchers, and the stair chair.
So unfortunately, just an unfortunate reality. The other piece that I wanted to highlight is that the vehicle reserve is going up by 5,000. Some of you may have seen, if you get our newsletter, or if you are in the village at all, or if you had a call, that we purchased from our police department a fly car. Joel has outfitted it as a first response vehicle. So in many cases, if we have staff that are in the area, they will respond to calls using that car, which is something that I wanted to highlight specifically for this meeting, because several years ago, I want to say 8 years ago, there was a fairly large cohort of lake residents who were very concerned about winter access to their properties. And so I really just wanted to get the message out that we now have the capacity to respond to those properties, as well as, you know, anywhere else that an ambulance may have a hard time getting to. But it is quite exciting. We had started out with a pilot. Joel basically, I say pilot, so it sounds official, but really Joel had outfitted his personal vehicle and was using it to respond. We got a lot of use out of it, and it was very helpful. So when our police chief's vehicle, when the lease was up, we decided to go this route. So that is very exciting.
The vehicle is configured as you mentioned, for the lake roads, it's configured so you can put a patient in it to transport them. It's not DOT approved, but at least we can get them up out of the lake roads and then to the ambulance. So that was one of the big benefits of it. And just real quick, back to the monitor lease line, that increase of 37,000, that's only for 5 years. It's a 5-year lease, and then we pay $1 for the equipment, and then that should drop off. It's not a permanent fixture.
Right, so at that point, we can move to a more regular replacement. But those are the big lines. Rich, you had a question about.
Well, the
one in particular?
1960 line is a big line, EMS hospital medical.
Oh, so, yeah, sorry, that is a big line. Unfortunately, those are not things that we have control over. That's just our medical insurance.
That's health insurance.
For staff.
That's health insurance for that.
Health insurance for the
How
full-time.
come it's so wildly different than the budget versus the expended? 195 to 127, 149 to 105. They're way below the budget.
That is a good question. I think probably the most recent dip is because, like I said, we didn't do the clerk that we had budgeted for. Why would we down? I don't know. There's some fluctuation there, Jeff. Do you have any insight
Yeah,
into that?
I can give you insight into, did an analysis of the actual, what we're spending per individual in a way that had not been looked at before. And so we noticed that everyone on staff is a family plan except for one individual. And so in talking to Joel, he said, we will likely need another, if we hire another full-time person with a family, or this only single individual in the entire roster becomes a family plan, then you jump up to 26,000. So he wanted to keep it the same as last year for that eventuality.
So,
And why it went down, we have changes in staff. Some folks changed their plans, adopted later than expected, those sorts of things. It's a,
how many staff are there that are covered?
excuse me,
How many staff are there?
how many staff are on the, I would have to pull that up exactly.
We have
It's
23.
20,
23.
Yes.
yeah,
And all but one are on a family plan.
all but one.
That's staff, I'm sorry. And then we have now 8 full-time employees. So that's family plan for 8 people.
Right?
The 9th full-timers.
Opting out currently.
So how was there only 105,000 spent in 2023? If there's some, that would be 160,000 at least for each family plan.
Again, so we have this, do you want to speak to the health insurance opt-out?
So we offer an opt-out to anyone who forgoes carrying their insurance here. And we pay them
500.
$500 a month in lieu of them taking our insurance. But we have to budget for them to take it because
Right.
they're entitled to it if they choose. You know,
And we've
if
seen
they're-
people shift.
if they opt out for the money and go to the spouse's insurance or whatever the case might be. And then the spouse or domestic partner's job situation changes. We have to take them back.
Right, I understand.
So we have to budget for,
But again, my concern is 100, I mean, these are big numbers, 120,000 or 130,000. From the budget, $1,099,000 to the 2022-23 expenditure of $971. There's $128,000 just right there. That went into your general fund.
we still haven't caught up for that overage 4 or 5 years ago.
I thought that was $100.
It was closer to 2.
There was also several successive years. The EMS budget, the fire, I hadn't noticed until you pointed it out that it's reliably low. EMS budget waivers drastic. Right? I mean, we have staff that quit in the middle of the year, so we have a lot of variation.
Yeah.
I don't know, I mean, I think we used to include it, but we had the over and under for each year. And we can probably show you that fairly easily, but we are certainly not keeping money out of the EMS budget.
Well, yeah.
I'm not saying that we should or we shouldn't, I'm not making a statement there, but over the last, say, decade, we have definitely lost.
Well, that would be interesting to know.
Yeah. Definitely. So for instance, if Joel had discovered that $37,000 expense a week from now instead of 2 weeks ago, that's something that the village just we just own, and that's kind of the risk that we carry.
I'm sympathetic, I understand that, it just sticks in my craw.
Yeah, understand.
That I don't want you to lose money. But I don't want us to lose, I don't want us to lose money either. But I think there's gotta be a
It
way to
seems
figure this
unfair.
out.
Yeah.
There really needs, there's gotta be a way to figure it out.
I mean, I'd be happy to do the analysis over a few years, because it's,
Let's see if over 10 years you've lost money,
right,
or you break even, I got no problem. But going forward, if there's $120,000 savings for 3-4 years in a row, that's real money.
yeah.
And I don't think it's fair that it goes into the general fund. I mean, I don't want you to lose money. I don't want you to make money out of the town fund. I know, since we're the biggest purveyor of the services.
I mean, there is, I think, a bigger conversation as far as what is the role. Right, Gordon, like, use the word service provider, how we think about the relationship is definitely a bigger question, but I think the better place to start is where we actually are over a decade or so, because I think you'll find that it is.
Yeah, well,
That is
I have
funny
those
as
numbers
figure.
somewhere. I haven't run it for a couple of years. I ran it when we had that huge year.
Right.
But I'll rerun it, just to see
Yeah,
where
it'd be
we are.
great to see.
10-year average. I will say, I like the word fair too. But I would say that it has been, as you know, I voice a lot of concerns about how much EMS costs, what this trend looks like going forward. The village budget is 3 million-ish, and 1.2 of it is one of our departments. That projects forward by 2030 to about 2 million for EMS alone. That'll happen faster if we have to start staffing a second ambulance. It has been suggested to me by some folks in the state government and in the industry that we collectively might be better off if a collaborative not-for-profit was established to run ambulance basically from Waterloo to the city of Ithaca. My concern with that is we would give up all hope of having any say in budget construction. We would be contracting with a third-party entity. And so, fair would go out the window. Salaries and profits, even though they're technically not for profit, would be their, whatever this fictional or imaginary organization would be, that would be their burden and purpose. Jason Molino, actually, our former county administrator, did that in Batavia. He stood up a not-for-profit to take away the municipal ambulance. And he said it was quite successful, but I haven't followed up to see, what that's like for the municipalities. So yeah, we want to play it as close to the line as we can. But I think the alternative to this kind of, well, the village runs this department and sometimes it's close, and once every 10 years, they're way over budget and they eat it. And the other 9 years, we get to see the towns donating. I don't know that that's worse than the alternative that's being kind of bandied about. I don't really like what I'm hearing is being suggested. The third option that I'm hearing being suggested is that CMC take over everything, and we'll just kind of let that sit in the middle of the room.
Well, they just got several $1 million, so they could pay for all of that.
Yeah.
So a couple of things. I think if you're doing that analysis, it would be very helpful. It'd also be helpful when we're looking at this, is to understand where the revenue components are coming in. Obviously, we derive some revenue through billing, you derive revenue through billing, but where we differ is that you can derive revenue through the mutual aid calls. And so it would be, and if there's any other revenue that you're getting from grants or anything else, I think that would be helpful to see in the calculation. My concern is that we're seeing, one of my concerns is that, and I raised this last year, it's that I appreciate the mutual aid situation, but I'm tired of subsidizing the city of Ithaca when the city of Ithaca doesn't tax their own citizens for ambulance service. And so I'm looking at, from 2021 or 2020 to 2021, mutual aid calls are 8%. They've gone up to 12.7% for 2022 to 2023. It'd be interesting to see. I know you don't have those, right, your budget years, but are we seeing that trajectory continue to climb? It sounds like you're servicing a lot of. It used to be rare, right? More
skipping
rare.
ahead a little bit, but the one thing I wanted to start with before we got to the mutual aid conversation, which I think you're right to highlight, because this is. Roden was on the radio not too long ago and got a lot of flack for it, right? Like, we are subsidizing the city of Ithaca. Their decisions do affect us. That 131 calls in one year is astronomical. And you're right, it used to be sort of a trade with banks, right? Like, it would be one for one. It was no longer that way. But Joel has been looking into how we can start to curb mutual aid calls. We have to have mutual aid agreements in place. We have legal obligations that we can't deny, but there are, well, we're hoping that there are some mechanisms that we can do to put reasonable constraints on that, right? Or that there are ways that we can bill, let's say creatively, recoup some of that money. The broader question about revenue, though, any grant money, so we don't include billing revenue in here, but any grant money, things like that would obviously, they would come into this budget.
Grants are, as you know, grants are project specific or item specific, so.
The
Right.
3-year average on the mutual aid is in
Yep, I
41,
saw that.
6, 7, 8.
So as far as the mutual aid goes, speaking to just revenue alone, Caitlin, I think the expenses for us providing mutual aid are not even comparable to any revenue. And honestly, I don't think if we were to look, I probably could pull this number. We don't get much revenue because a lot of the patients that we're going to are Medicaid patients, so we might get $150 out of a transport. But honestly, a lot of them are non-transports. We're going and either we get canceled or we get put on a standby. I've already gotten the fall roof moving significantly to stop that. So I really don't think you're gonna see quite the same number next year at the same table. Couple of reasons why. Skylar ambulance last year was a big source of numbers. They have now gone under and they've developed a county program. And we have done very little mutual aid for them, compared to years in the past.
Well, and there was a time when you thought you might have to step into Watkins.
And we were for a little while,
Okay.
not consistently, but we were. The other piece to it is we have stopped doing standbys. Everybody in the county, other than banks, are starting to stand our ground. I've put meetings together and we strategize some of this. We're no longer doing standbys for the city, which counts as a call.
Okay.
It's too much wear and tear. They send us, we sit at the hospital, which takes us away from Covert, for a good example, or Hector, and we don't turn a call. It's gotta stop, especially when that's the majority of them. The other piece that we are now looking at is holding calls. There's an EMD dispatch system that we already use. If it's a low priority call, we need to force Bang's hand and tell them, no, it's a stub toe. You got to handle the call when you get an ambulance available. And we're starting to see that happening. And kind of forcing their hand for that service. But as Ben alluded to, we are looking at ways to find out how can we charge Ithaca when they use our service. I mean, if you called an emergency tree service to cut down a tree in the road right now, they're gonna send you a bill.
Right.
And so I'm sympathetic to it.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate, I think I'm delighted to hear about Schuyler County because I remember these meetings a couple of years ago, right? And it was that they were collapsing and what was gonna happen and we were gonna need a second, another rig just to stand that up and, so I'm glad to hear that that's moving in the right direction. Last year, I remember hearing that, what was this, the Northern Seneca? And,
South Seneca.
and they were basically stabilizing, are they still?
It's
Or
stayed for the last probably
Which
4
one?
or 5 years. They kind of limp.
South Seneca's,
Okay.
they're holding their own.
Yeah. They
Now,
kind of-
North Seneca's sinking quick now, so.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, Skylar, every year, it feels like we've done this for a long time. Every year, there's this concern about, well, this agency or that agency. It finally came true with Skylar. And if CMC hadn't stepped in to, I bang on CMC, but if they hadn't stepped in to work with Schuyler County to run that agency or create an agency over there, we would be there. I mean, there really wouldn't be an alternative. What's happening to the north? I think stay tuned. I think that's going to be an interesting one to watch. depending on what happens with North Seneca.
So have there been any conversations with the city? Or is that even a non-starter with them?
So we're not to that point yet, as far as I know, unless Joel has had
I am
friendly
working,
conversation.
personally, I'm not ready to approach Ithaca. When we are, and I obviously involve them, I will be ready when all the other agencies are on the same ground, so we're not going as a department, we're going as everyone else to the city of Sig, because it's not just us, it's other agencies as well. So we're trying to approach all this as a collaborative rather than just one bad person. And the other thing I just want to toss out there, comparing us to other agencies, it is a sales pitch because it's a sense of pride for us, or for me. Almost any other department in the state provides an ambulance, and that's where it ends. We do have some downtime, and I've tried to capture that and give that back to the community. With our service, you don't just get an ambulance, you get fall prevention programs, you get medication reconciliation programs for people. We really try to give our downtime back to the community and help in ways that we don't charge them for. And fall prevention is a big one. A lot of our community falls, and it can hip fracture. If you're over the age of 65, typically after a hip fracture, you live about 4 more years. And that's a pretty scary statistic. So we do a lot, just try to give our time back and provide services for free to our community that you're not going to see at other departments. And that goes with a lot of stuff we do in the ambulance. We just became what's called an RSI department, which we're the first in the region. And that's a service you're not going to get anywhere other than a helicopter. And the expense of that is minimal. There's a lot of training and research to build the program. But you don't get that with other departments. So I feel like rapid sequence intubation is essentially general anesthesia. So for strokes and traumas and respiratory conditions, it's a big tool to have in our pocket.
Joel's underplaying it, but it's worth pointing out that we also got EMS agency of the year for our health department area and the county. And a lot of that is tied to RSI, which is a fairly large advancement. I mean, it makes a big difference. I obviously am not, I don't know the specifics, but it's essentially a medically induced coma, so you can be stabilized on your way to, real stroke victims, diabetics, or the heart attacks, various other
Traumas, I mean, yeah, it's a
So
lot
it's
of.
really a life-saving, it's a fairly massive achievement.
The only other people in the nation that are allowed to do it are physicians. To give you an idea, sincerely.
To your question, Caitlin, the conversations with the city haven't not been had, but they haven't been officially.
Got it.
had. And part of the reason why the county is moving in the direction of standing up this EMT rapid response is to pick up those stub toe calls. So Bangs doesn't, or so that we don't, so that the paramedics can be available to respond to the more life-threatening things. The city's position is that they're not in the ambulance business and they don't have to be. After November 7th, there may be more conversations. That's still up in the air.
Is that election day?
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Anything else specifically to go over?
No, I mean, not on the EMS budget.
So questions, other questions, either line item spending questions or general EMS questions.
And just, to say, obviously, this probably goes without, but you can also reach out with questions anytime.
No, we appreciate that, Michelle and Joel met, and we really appreciate your time, and we're gonna be changing some of our fee structures. That would actually be something that would be really helpful, is that as you update your fees, you let us know
Yeah.
your update, so we can, because we would update ours mid-year. Because we're always gonna be 6 months behind you, even if we think we're on the cutting edge, and we would do it biannually.
We can definitely do that.
Sure. I mean, that's what I did the last round.
Yeah.
It was just bad timing, I think, for you guys, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's for us, no, it really is, we can take care of it anytime during the year, and this is a place where we need to take care of it, so that would be helpful, thank you.
Any other questions? Over, Hector, really quiet over there on that side of the room.
Well, I moved over here.
That's fine, say the other day, like.
Oh, we're still working on that one. Yeah, do part two on that one.
Yeah.
Okay, well, if there are no other questions, then thank you, everybody.
Any questions online? No,
Yeah.
viewers? Rapt attention is being paid by many people.
When it comes to spending a combined 1.9 million. What's that?
Spend $210,000 here.
And then we. Well, said something to get that gift info. All right, then on the village's part, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. So moved. Do I have a second.
Move to
March
adjourn.
second.
Yes, second.
All right, there's no objection, we'll stay adjourned.
Yep,
Thank you,
we got
everybody.
through it.